Clara found him slumped against a jagged rock in the freezing rain, his hand trembling as he stroked the wet fur of a massive Malinois that refused to leave his side. Caleb, a dying Navy SEAL, wasn't looking for a doctor. He was looking for a witness to the secret that was killing him. "Don't save me," he wheezed. "Save the boy." Before we dive into this heart-wrenching journey of sacrifice and secrets, please subscribe to the channel and follow the story to the end. Also, comment with the city you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories reach. The encounter at the edge of the world. The tires of Clara's old truck hissed against the wet asphalt as the storm turned the Oregon coastline into a gray, blurred nightmare. She wasn't supposed to be out here. She was supposed to be hiding from her own life. Then she saw the shadow, and a massive dog stood in the middle of the road, its eyes reflecting her headlights like twin amber lanterns. Clara slammed on the brakes, her heart jolting against her ribs. "Move, dog, move!" she shouted, hitting the steering wheel, but the animal didn't budge. It barked once, a deep, resonant sound that carried the weight of a command. Clara stepped out into the rain, the cold soaking through her thin jacket instantly. As she approached, the dog turned and ran toward a cluster of rocks near the cliff's edge. There, half hidden by a collapsed pine tree, lay a man. His skin was the color of ash, and his breathing sounded like glass grinding against glass. "Hey, can you hear me?" Clara knelt beside him, her hands moving instinctively. She was a vet, but she knew human trauma well enough to see he was fading. The man's eyes snapped open, piercing blue, even in the dim light. He grabbed her wrist with a strength that shouldn't have been possible for a dying man. "Atlas! Keep him away!" he choked out. "Who? The dog?" Clara asked, trying to check his pulse. "No," the man whispered, his grip tightening. "The ones behind us." The first mini-climax hit when a black SUV slowed down on the road above them, its headlights cutting through the fog like searchlights. The dog, Atlas, let out a low, vibrating growl that Clara felt in her own marrow. "Are those your friends?" Clara whispered, her voice trembling. "If they find me, they kill the truth," Caleb rasped. "Get me out of here, please, not for me, for the mission." Clara didn't think. She helped the heavy, muscular man toward her truck, his weight nearly collapsing her. As Atlas moved like a wraith, guarding their rear, his head low and his ears pinned back. They managed to scramble into the cab just as the SUV's doors opened. "Drive," Caleb commanded, his head hitting the headrest. "Don't look back." As Clara sped away, her mind was a whirlwind of panic. She was a woman who had moved to the coast to find peace after losing her husband to a senseless accident, and now she was harboring a fugitive Navy SEAL. "Who are you?" she demanded, her hands shaking on the wheel. "Caleb," he said, his voice fluttering. "And you just became the most wanted woman in the Pacific Northwest." The first major twist arrived only 10 minutes into the drive. Caleb pulled back his blood-soaked shirt, but it wasn't a bullet wound. His skin was covered in strange, jagged black veins that seemed to be pulsing. "What is that?" Clara gasped, nearly veering off the road. "Biogenic waste," Caleb said, a bitter smile touching his lips. "My own unit. They used us as filters. I'm not just dying, Clara. I'm evidence of a war crime committed on our own soil." The psychological weight of his words hit Clara harder than the storm. He wasn't just a dying man. He was a walking crime scene. "I need a doctor," she said, reaching for her phone. "No phones," Caleb barked, knocking it out of her hand. They tracked the signal. If you go to a hospital, we both die before we hit the ER doors. Atlas leaned forward from the back seat, resting his massive head on Clara's shoulder. It was a gesture of trust, one that felt heavy with responsibility. "Where do we go then?" Clara asked, her voice small. "Your place," Caleb said. "You live alone. You have the supplies. You're a vet. Treat me like one of your animals. Just keep me alive long enough to send the file." The tension ratcheted up when Clara noticed the headlights behind them again. They hadn't lost them. The black SUV was gaining, its engine roaring over the sound of the rain. "They're coming!" Clara screamed. Caleb reached into his tactical vest and pulled out a small metallic cylinder. "Atlas, intercept!" The dog didn't hesitate. As Clara slowed for a sharp turn, Caleb threw the door open just an inch, and the Malinois vanished into the night. "What are you doing? They'll kill him!" Clara cried out, horrified. "He knows the terrain," Caleb said, his eyes closing as he fought the pain. "He's a SEAL, Clara. Just like me. He's the distraction." A mini-climax followed seconds later when a loud boom echoed behind them. Atlas had dragged a branch across the road, causing the SUV to swerve and flip into a ditch. Clara watched in the rearview mirror as the vehicle burst into flames. Did he make it?" she asked, her breath hitching. A moment later, a golden shadow emerged from the woods further down the road, running alongside the truck. Caleb whistled low, and Atlas leapt back into the moving vehicle through the open window, his fur smelling of smoke and pine. "Good boy," Caleb whispered, his hand falling limp against the dog's flank. They reached Clara's secluded cabin an hour later. It was a fortress of cedar and silence, tucked away in a valley that the GPS struggled to map. As she helped Caleb inside, he collapsed onto her rug, his breathing becoming shallow. "The file," he muttered. "In the dog's collar. Don't let them take it." The major twist of this section struck as Clara removed Atlas's heavy tactical collar. It wasn't just a flash drive hidden there. It was a digital key to a vault, and along with it, a photograph. In the photo, Caleb was standing with a young boy who looked exactly like him, both of them smiling in front of a Navy helicopter. "Is this your son?" Clara asked, her heart breaking. Caleb didn't answer. He was unconscious, his body shivering as the black veins spread toward his throat. Suddenly, the silence of the cabin was shattered by a soft, rhythmic thumping on the roof. It wasn't the rain. It was the sound of boots. "They're on the roof," Clara whispered, looking up in terror. Atlas stood over Caleb's body, his lips peeling back to reveal white teeth. He didn't bark. He was a silent hunter now. "Clara," a voice called out from the darkness outside, amplified by a megaphone. "We know you're in there. Give us the seal and the drive and you walk away. We don't want to kill a civilian." Clara looked at the dying man, then at the dog who had placed his life in her hands. She had spent a year running from grief, but as she grabbed her late husband's hunting rifle from the wall, she realized the running was over. "You're not getting him," she whispered to the empty room. The front door groaned under the weight of a breaching ram. Clara felt a surge of adrenaline that washed away her fear. She wasn't just a vet anymore. She was the last line of defense for a man who had given everything for a country that had poisoned him. "Atlas," she said, her voice steady. "Hold the door." The dog let out a low, terrifying snarl, and as the wood began to splinter, Clara realized that the emotional part of this story wasn't the dying. It was the fight to keep a hero's soul alive. The first wave of soldiers burst through the windows, and the cabin became a theater of chaos and courage. Clara fired the first shot, and as the muzzle flash lit up the room, she saw Caleb's eyes open one last time, filled with a desperate, silent gratitude. Certainly. Here is the continuation of Part 2, picking up exactly where the previous segment left off. As they scrambled out onto the back porch, the freezing sea air slapped Clara's face, momentarily clearing the adrenaline-induced fog in her mind. But Caleb couldn't keep up. He collapsed into the thick, freezing mud, his breath rattling in his chest like broken machinery. The black, jagged veins on his neck were pulsing now, visible even in the dim moonlight. "Caleb! You have to get up! We're almost to the tree line!" Clara sobbed, grabbing his tactical vest and trying to haul his dead weight upward. Atlas stood over them, his golden fur matted with blood and rain, his head swiveling between the burning house and the darkness of the woods. A mini-climax peaked when the red dot of a laser sight suddenly danced across Clara's forehead. "Don't move, Doctor," a cold voice echoed from the shadows of the porch. It was the lead mercenary, his face half hidden by a ballistic mask. He stepped into the light, leveling a suppressed submachine gun at them. "The dog is a tracker, Caleb," the mercenary sneered, ignoring Clara. "You really thought we'd let our most expensive asset just walk away with the keys to the kingdom? Atlas has a subdermal beacon. We've been watching you dazed to the moment you crossed the county line." The major twist hit Clara like a physical blow. She looked at Atlas, who was whining low in his throat, nudging Caleb's limp hand. The dog wasn't just a partner. He was a Trojan horse. Every move they had made, every secret Caleb had whispered in the cabin, had been broadcasted to the very people trying to kill them. "Caleb, is it true?" Clara whispered, her voice trembling. Caleb looked up, his eyes glassy. I didn't know about the beacon. Clara, I'm sorry." He turned his gaze to the mercenary. "If you want the drive, let her go. She's just a vet. She doesn't know what's on it." "She knows too much now," the mercenary replied, his finger tightening on the trigger. The tension snapped when Atlas suddenly lunged, not at the mercenary, but at a stack of heavy propane tanks Clara kept for her winter heating. With a strength born of desperation, the dog knocked over a precariously balanced tank, sending it crashing onto a jagged rock. The hiss of escaping gas filled the air. "Clara, now!" Caleb screamed, finding a final burst of strength. He pulled a flare gun from his side pocket and fired it directly into the cloud of gas. The resulting explosion wasn't massive, but the fireball was enough to throw the mercenary backward and provide a wall of heat and smoke. Clara didn't wait to see if he survived. She grabbed Caleb's arm and draped it over her shoulder, her small frame straining under the pressure. Together with Atlas, they vanished into the dense, black embrace of the Oregon woods. The pace accelerated as they stumbled through the undergrowth. Clara could hear the sounds of heavy boots and barking hounds behind them. The mercenaries had released their own attack dogs. "We can't outrun them with you bleeding like this," Clara panted, her lungs burning. She looked at Caleb, whose face was now almost completely gray. The psychological weight of the situation was crushing her. She was a healer, yet she was leading a man to his death in a forest filled with predators. "The creek," Caleb managed to gasp. "If we get to the water, it might mask the scent. But the beacon... Atlas..." Clara stopped. She knelt in the mud and looked at Atlas. "I have to get it out, right now." "You don't have tools!" Caleb protested. I have my hands in a pocket knife, Clara said, her voice turning icy and professional. She felt the back of Atlas's neck until she found a hard, pea-sized lump near the base of his skull. The dog stood perfectly still, his amber eyes locked onto hers with a terrifying level of trust. A mini-climax arrived as the sound of the hounds grew deafeningly loud. Clara made a quick, shallow incision. Atlas flinched but didn't make a sound. Her fingers were slick with rain and blood as she dug for the cold piece of plastic. Got it, she hissed, pulling the bloody chip free. She didn't throw it away. Instead, she looked at a stray raccoon scurrying through a hollow log nearby. In a move of desperate brilliance, she smeared some of Caleb's blood on the chip and wedged it into the raccoon's fur. The animal took off in the opposite direction, carrying the electronic scent away from them. That'll buy us 10 minutes, Clara said, helping Caleb up. Maybe less. As they reached the edge of a fast-flowing creek, a hook kept the tension high. The water was surging from the storm, turning the crossing into a potential death trap. But they had no choice. They slid into the icy water, the current threatening to sweep them toward the jagged rocks downstream. Clara, look at me, Caleb said as they huddled under an overhanging bank on the far side. The drive. It contains the names of the senators who funded the Black Vein Project. My husband. Your husband. He found the ledger. That's why he was killed. It wasn't an accident, Clara. It was an execution. The revelation shattered Clara's heart. All the guilt she had carried for a year, the feeling that she hadn't checked his brakes, the thought that he was just tired. It was all a lie. Her husband was a hero who died for the truth. Why didn't you tell me sooner? She choked out. Because the moment you know, you can never go back, Caleb replied. But look at Atlas. He knew. He's been guarding that secret since the day your husband died. He chose me to find you. The psychological rhythm shifted. Clara wasn't just surviving anymore. She was on a mission of vengeance. She looked at Atlas, who was staring back at the woods they had just left. The dog's ears suddenly pinned back. A major cliffhanger struck when the woods across the creek didn't erupt with soldiers, but with silence. The hounds had stopped barking. The rain seemed to hush. They're not coming, Caleb whispered, his brow furrowing. Why did they stop? Then, the sky turned a sickly, artificial green. A high-altitude drone hummed overhead, dropping a series of small metallic canisters into the valley. Gas! Caleb gasped, his eyes widening in horror. They're not trying to capture us anymore. They're cleaning the site. Clara grabbed Caleb and Atlas, pulling them into the deepest part of the rock crevice. The canisters hissed, releasing a thick, translucent vapor that began to settle over the forest floor like a lethal blanket. They were trapped between a rising river and a wall of poison. Atlas, find a way up, Clara commanded. The dog began to climb the sheer rock face with impossible agility, his claws scratching for purchase. He reached a ledge and looked down, barking a sharp, rhythmic signal. There was a cave, but it was 20 feet above them. As Clara pushed Caleb upward, the gas began to roll over the creek bank. She felt the first sting in her lungs, a sharp, metallic burn that signaled the end. She reached for Caleb's hand, but her foot slipped on the wet moss. She began to slide toward the water, toward the gas. Caleb lunged, his fingers grazing hers, but his strength failed. Just as she was about to vanish into the mist, a powerful set of jaws locked onto her jacket collar. Atlas had jumped down, anchoring himself to a gnarled root with his back legs while holding her entire weight with his neck muscles. The part ends as Clara hangs suspended over the poison, staring into the fierce, unyielding eyes of the dog, while Caleb screams her name from the ledge above, the sound lost in the roar of the storm. The pressure of Atlas's jaws against Clara's collar was the only thing keeping her soul from dissolving into the emerald fog below. She could feel the vibration of the dog's low, guttural growl through her spine, a sound of sheer, agonizing effort. Above her, Caleb was a silhouette of desperation, his fingers hooked into the rocky outcrop as he reached down, his face contorted in a silent scream. The poison gas hissed against the water's surface, a hungry ghost waiting for her to fall. Then, with a sudden violent heave, Atlas jerked backward, his powerful neck muscles bulging, and Clara was slammed onto the cold stone ledge next to Caleb. The first mini-climax peaked as the ledge groaned, a massive chunk of granite shearing off and tumbling into the mist where Clara had been hanging seconds before. "Don't breathe! Just climb!" Caleb wheezed, his voice cracking. He didn't offer a hand to help her up. He couldn't. His own body was failing, the black veins now tracing a map of death up his jawline. Clara scrambled to her feet, her hands raw and bleeding, so grabbing the scruff of Atlas's neck as the dog led them deeper into the darkness of the cave. The psychological weight of the last 10 minutes hit her. She was no longer a doctor. She was a survivor in a war she hadn't signed up for. Every breath felt like swallowing needles, the remnants of the gas burning her throat. But the sight of Atlas's swaying tail was her only North Star. They moved in a frantic, rhythmic silence until the cave opened into a wider chamber, damp with the scent of ancient earth and something metallic. The pace shifted from a crawl to a desperate run as footsteps echoed from a secondary entrance deep within the mountain. The mercenaries weren't just following them. They knew the cave system. "Clara, stop," Caleb whispered, pulling her behind a jagged stalagmite. "They're using thermal?" "The gas was just to flush us into the choke point." He handed her the flare gun, his fingers lingering on hers for a second too long, a silent goodbye that made her blood run cold. The first major twist shattered the temporary stillness. A voice boomed through the cave, amplified by the rocky walls. "Clara, I know you can hear me. This isn't about the drive anymore. Check the back of your husband's watch, the one you've been wearing since the funeral." Clara froze, her heart stopping. She slowly turned her wrist, looking at the silver casing of the watch her husband had supposedly been wearing during the accident. With trembling fingers, she pried the backplate open with her nail. It didn't contain a movement mechanism. It contained a tiny, high-frequency transmitter that had been chirping her location to the satellites for over a year. "He wasn't just a victim, Clara." The voice of the lead mercenary sneered from the darkness. "He was our lead analyst. He didn't die for the truth. He died trying to sell it to the highest bidder, and he used you as his safety deposit box." The psychological betrayal was more toxic than any gas. Clara stared at the watch, the man she had mourned for a year suddenly becoming a stranger. Her grief turned into a sharp, jagged rage. She didn't cry. She ripped the watch from her wrist and smashed it against the stone, the glass shattering into 1,000 useless diamonds. "He lied to me," she whispered, her voice devoid of emotion. Caleb looked at her, his amber eyes filled with a pity that hurt more than the truth. "He was trying to get you out, Clara. He played both sides to buy your freedom. That's why he's dead." The tension ratcheted up as the first tactical light cut through the chamber. Atlas let out a roar, leaping over the rocks toward the approaching shadows. A mini-climax erupted as the chamber was filled with the staccato rhythm of suppressed gunfire. Atlas wasn't just attacking. He was a distraction, drawing the fire away from the center of the room. "We have to move now!" Caleb grabbed her arm, dragging her toward a narrow crevice that smelled of salt and sea air. They were moving toward the cliffs again. The pace was relentless. Clara's mind was a battlefield. Grief for a husband she didn't know, fear for a man she barely knew, and a growing, primal bond with a dog that seemed to be the only honest thing left in the world. They reached a metal catwalk suspended over a massive underground hangar. Below them sat a sleek, black submersible, its engines humming with a low-frequency thrum that vibrated in Clara's teeth. "That's the extraction," Caleb panted, leaning heavily against the railing. "If that sub leaves, the evidence goes to a black site in international waters. It'll never see the light of day." Another mini-climax hit as a sniper's bullet sparked off the railing inches from Caleb's head. Clara pushed him down, her eyes scanning the catwalk. She saw a control panel 50 feet away, guarded by 2 men in full tactical gear. "I can't reach it," Caleb whispered, his breathing becoming a wet rattle. "But Atlas can." He let out a sharp, 2-tone whistle. From the shadows below the catwalk, the Malinois appeared, moving like a golden ghost. He didn't bark. He launched himself at the first guard, his weight taking the man over the edge into the abyss. The second guard turned, but Clara fired the flare gun. The phosphorus bolt hit the man's tactical vest, turning him into a screaming pillar of fire. The psychological horror of the sight made Clara want to vomit, but she forced herself to keep moving. The next profound twist came as they reached the control panel. Caleb began frantically typing codes into the keypad, his blood dripping onto the glowing buttons. "Clara, the drive." "It's not a ledger," he gasped, his eyes wide with a terrifying realization as the data began to scroll. "It's a kill switch. The Black Vein Project. It isn't just a chemical. It's a nanite delivery system in the local water supply. They can trigger a cardiac event in anyone they want, anywhere in the state, with a single satellite burst." He looked at her, the gravity of the secret crushing them both. "The mercenaries aren't here to get the drive. They're here to make sure we trigger it. They want us to be the ones who pull the trigger so they can blame the rogue SEAL for the massacre." Clara felt the world tilt. They were being framed for a genocide that hadn't happened yet. A mini cliffhanger struck as the hangar doors began to cycle shut, trapping them inside with the sub and a dozen soldiers now converging on their position. "We have to destroy the drive," Clara said, her voice hard. "If we can't expose them, we at least stop the switch." "I can't," Caleb whispered, his hand hovering over the execute button. "The drive is encrypted to your husband's biometric signature." "Clara, your husband wasn't just the analyst, and he was the architect. The biometric lock is set to your DNA as his next of kin. You're the only one who can delete it or activate it." The choice was a physical weight, a hammer to her soul. She looked at the screen, then at the soldiers closing in, their rifles leveled at her chest. "Clara, give us the key," the lead mercenary shouted, stepping onto the catwalk. He took off his mask, revealing a face Clara recognized from her husband's funeral, his best friend and former commanding officer. "Don't be a martyr for a lie. Your husband wanted this. He wanted you to be taken care of. Just press the button, and you walk out of here a billionaire." The rhythm of the scene slowed down to the beat of Clara's heart. She looked at Atlas, who had returned to her side, his fur scorched and his eyes weary. The dog looked at her with a clarity that surpassed human speech. He didn't care about billions or biotech. He cared about the hand that fed him and the heart that broke for him. Clara reached for the keypad. Her fingers hovered over the purge command. "If I do this, we all die," she said, looking Caleb in the eye. "It's a good day for it," he replied, a faint, genuine smile breaking through his mask of pain. Just as her finger touched the glass, a mini-climax erupted as the hangar's overhead crane suddenly swung into motion. Atlas had stepped on a secondary floor plate, triggering the emergency docking arm. The massive steel hook smashed into the catwalk, sending the lead mercenary plummeting toward the sub below. The impact rocked the entire structure. "Delete it!" Caleb roared. Clara slammed her hand onto the purge icon. The screen flashed a violent red, and a progress bar began to crawl. 0%. 5%. The soldiers opened fire. Caleb threw himself over Clara, using his body as a shield. She felt the impact of the bullets hitting his vest, the thuds vibrating through her own chest. "Atlas, compass!" Caleb screamed, the same command from the earlier mission. The dog became a blur of teeth and gold, creating a circle of protection around them as the data slowly dissolved into nothingness. The major twist of the final minutes arrived when the hangar didn't just go dark. It began to flood. The Purge command had triggered a secondary failsafe, scuttling the entire facility. Seawater began to roar into the chamber from the pressurized vents. "We have to go, now!" Clara grabbed Caleb, who was now coughing up blood. She hauled him toward a small emergency hatch as the water rose to their waists in seconds. The soldiers were panicking, abandoning their weapons to scramble for the high ground. "Clara, go," Caleb gasped, his legs going limp. "I'm the anchor. I'll only pull you under." "No more leaving people behind!" Clara screamed, her voice echoing off the flooded walls. She grabbed Atlas's harness and hooked it to Caleb's belt. "Together. We go together." The part ends as the water reaches their necks, the roar of the ocean filling the cavern, and Clara takes a final deep breath before pulling Caleb and Atlas under the surface into a dark, flooded tunnel that leads either to the open sea or to a watery grave. Leaving the freezing seawater didn't just touch Clara's skin, it invaded her soul, a violent reminder that the abyss didn't just take, it consumed. She felt Caleb's hand slip from hers in the churning dark of the tunnel, the weight of his body anchored by the water filling his lungs. "Atlas!" she screamed, though it emerged only as a frantic chain of silver bubbles. The dog was already there, his powerful legs driving through the current, his teeth finding the fabric of Caleb's jacket and hauling him upward toward a faint, pulsating light. They broke the surface in a concrete drainage pipe, gasping for air that tasted of salt and old rust. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs as she dragged Caleb onto the narrow walkway, his chest heaving with a wet, rattling sound. "We're out, Caleb. Look at me," she urged, her voice echoing in the hollow metal tube. But Caleb wasn't looking at her. He was looking at the small, just a glowing screen of a tablet he'd pulled from his waterproof pouch. The data purge hadn't just deleted the files, it had triggered a real-time GPS map of the facility's last active signals. "Clara, the drive wasn't the only thing your husband left behind," Caleb wheezed, his eyes wide with a new kind of terror. "Look at the signal origin. The satellite burst isn't coming from the hangar. It's coming from the town's hospital, my unit. They didn't just target the water. They've already moved the primary dispensers into the emergency room's ventilation system. The first mini-climax hit like a physical blow when a heavy iron grate at the end of the pipe groaned and buckled. A tactical team wasn't coming through the door. They were cutting through the walls. Sparks showered the dark tunnel, illuminating the silhouettes of 3 men in gas masks. Clara grabbed a heavy wrench from a maintenance shelf, her movements no longer those of a pacifist, but of a protector. As the first soldier lunged through the gap, Atlas didn't wait for a command. He was a golden blur of fury, his weight slamming the man back into the jagged metal edge. "Go, through the maintenance hatch!" Caleb shouted, shoving Clara toward a vertical ladder. He turned back, firing his last 3 rounds to suppress the breach. The psychological rhythm of the chase shifted from escape to a desperate offensive. Clara climbed, her fingers screaming in protest, the sound of boots on metal rungs right behind them. They emerged into the rain-soaked night, not at the shore, but in the middle of a high-security parking lot. "That's Miller's command vehicle," Clara whispered, pointing to a reinforced black van idling near the perimeter. The major twist arrived with the sound of a familiar ringtone, not her phone, but Caleb's. He answered it, putting it on speaker. "Clara, it's me." The voice was her husband's. It was cold, calculated, and very much alive. "I told you to stay away from the watch. I told you the truth would kill you." Clara's world didn't just tilt, it shattered. The man she had mourned, the man whose ring she still wore, was standing somewhere in that facility, watching them. "You're alive? You let me bury an empty casket while you poisoned a city?" "I did it for us, Clara. The money. It's enough to start over anywhere. Just give Miller the drive and walk away." The psychological betrayal was a sharper blade than any mercenary's knife. Clara looked at the black van, then at Caleb, who was staring at her with a mixture of pity and resolve. "He's not the man you loved, Clara. He's the architect, and architects don't leave witnesses." The tension spiked as Miller's voice broke over the van's external speakers. "The perimeter is sealed. You have 60 seconds to hand over the biometric key, or we activate the hospital's dispensers manually." "I don't have the drive. I purged it," Clara screamed into the rain. "The drive was a decoy," Miller's voice crackled. "The real key is the blood in your veins. Your husband designed the nanites to recognize his genetic markers. You are the only person on this planet who can stabilize the chemical reaction before it becomes a gas. You are the antidote, Clara, or the catalyst." The profound twist was a weight that nearly brought her to her knees. She wasn't just a witness. Her very biology was the final piece of their weapon. If they took her, they had a perfect, stable bioweapon. If she died, the city died with her. "Atlas, stay!" Clara commanded as the dog growled at the approaching soldiers. She looked at Caleb. "If they get me, you have to kill me. Do you understand? Don't let them take the antidote." Caleb's face contorted in agony. "Clara, I can't." "You're a SEAL. You've killed for less," she roared, her voice breaking. "Look at the hospital, Caleb. There are children in there." The mini-climax erupted when Atlas suddenly broke his stay, lunging not at the soldiers, but at the power transformer behind the black van. He bit through the heavy cabling, the resulting electrical arc blinding the tactical team and cutting the van's floodlights. In the confusion, Clara grabbed a discarded smoke grenade from the ground and slammed it against the asphalt. "Run! To the van!" she shouted. They didn't just run. They became shadows in the gray haze. Caleb reached the driver's side, dragging the mercenary pilot out by his throat, while Clara scrambled into the back. The interior of the van was a wall of monitors. On the central screen, She saw a live feed of the hospital's intensive care unit. Her husband was there, standing in the hallway, looking directly into a security camera. He held up a finger to his lips, a silent command to stay quiet. "He's going to trigger it now," Caleb shouted, putting the van into gear and smashing through the security gate. "He knows we have the van's override." The chase that followed was a frantic, bone-jarring race through the narrow coastal streets. Miller's remaining vehicles were on their tail, their headlights weaving through the rain. Every turn was a mini-climax, the van skidding on the slick pavement, Atlas bracing himself against the equipment racks. "I can't stop the signal from here," Clara cried, her fingers flying over the keyboard. "I need to be within 50 feet of the primary dispenser. The Bluetooth handshake requires proximity." "The hospital roof," Caleb said, his jaw set. "We jumped the curb at the ambulance bay." The major twist of the final minutes hit when they arrived at the hospital. It wasn't a tactical team waiting for them. It was the local police, led by the sheriff Clara had known for years. "Stop the vehicle!" The sheriff's voice boomed. "They think we're the terrorists," Clara realized, seeing the news helicopters overhead. Her husband had flipped the narrative. To the world, a rogue SEAL and a grieving widow were attacking a hospital. The psychological rhythm accelerated to a breaking point. Clara looked at Atlas. "Atlas, the vent! Find the vent!" She opened the back door as the van was still moving. The dog leapt, a golden streak across the pavement, vanishing into a basement window while the police opened fire on the van's tires. "Clara, get out. I'll draw them off." Caleb steered the van toward the parking garage, leaving her alone in the rain. She ran toward the main entrance, her heart a drum of pure adrenaline. She burst through the doors, seeing the panic in the lobby. She saw him, her husband. He was wearing a lab coat, looking every bit the savior. He moved toward her, his arms open. "Clara, thank God. Give me the override. I can stop it." She looked into his eyes and saw the lie. It wasn't love. It was a calculation. "Where is our son, Thomas? Caleb said he was alive." Thomas's face softened for a fraction of a second, then hardened into stone. "He was a variable I couldn't control. He's safe, but only if you cooperate." The final mini-cliffhanger struck as the hospital's alarm changed from a fire alert to a biohazard lockdown. The vents began to hiss. A faint, sweet smell filled the air, the scent of the black vein. "It started," Thomas whispered, checking his watch. 50 feet, Clara. You're close enough. The nanites are reacting to your presence. Look at your skin." Clara looked down at her arms. The black veins weren't appearing. They were glowing. Her blood was neutralizing the air around her, but the range was too small. She could save herself, but everyone else in the building was starting to cough. "I'm the filter," she realized, the horror of her husband's design finally clicking. "You didn't make an antidote. You made a human shield." The part ends as Thomas reaches for her throat, his eyes filled with a terrifying, cold ambition, while the sound of Atlas barking echoed through the ventilation shafts above. The dog's desperate paws scratching against the metal as he tried to reach the woman who was currently the only source of air for 300 dying people. Shattered watch and the burnt-out drive to sink into the abyss. Thomas's hand clamped onto Clara's throat, his fingers digging into her skin with a cold, clinical precision that felt more like an experiment than an assault. The glow beneath her skin pulsed in time with her frantic heartbeat, a luminous trap that turned her very existence into his ultimate weapon. You were always the heart of this project, Clara, Thomas whispered, his voice vibrating against her ear. The bond we had, it wasn't just romance. It was the calibration. Clara's vision blurred as the air in the lobby turned thick with the sweet, sickening scent of the black vein. Around them, people began to collapse. Nurses clutching their chests, patients sliding out of wheelchairs, their bodies reacting to the nanites that Thomas had unleashed. The first mini-climax peaked when the hospital's emergency lights flickered and died, leaving them bathed in the eerie, bioluminescent light of Clara's own blood. "You're not a man," Clara wheezed, her hands clawing at his iron grip. "You're a ghost." She didn't wait for him to respond. With a primal surge of adrenaline, she slammed her forehead into his nose, the crack of bone echoing through the hollow lobby. Thomas recoiled, his grip loosening just enough for Clara to spin away. She didn't run for the exit. She ran toward the central HVAC controls behind the reception desk. "Atlas, now!" she screamed, her voice cracking with the effort to breathe. Above them, the sound of metal groaning filled the air. Atlas had reached the primary filtration unit. The dog's weight shifted the ductwork, and with a spectacular crash, the Malinois burst through the ceiling, landing between Clara and her husband. Atlas didn't growl. He didn't bark. He stood in a low, lethal crouch, his eyes fixed on Thomas with a recognition that went back years. Thomas wiped the blood from his face, a terrifying smile spreading across his lips. "The dog was always smarter than you, Clara. He knows who his master is." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, high-frequency whistle. He blew it, a sound silent to human ears, but a physical blow to a dog's senses. Atlas winced, his legs buckling, a pained whimper escaping his throat. The first major twist struck like a lightning bolt. Thomas didn't just have a whistle, he had a remote link. "Did you think I'd leave the most dangerous K9 in the world without a failsafe? Atlas isn't here to save you, Clara. He's here to finish the harvest." Thomas pressed a button on a small remote, and Atlas's amber eyes suddenly turned a dull, vacant red. The dog turned toward Clara, his teeth bared in a snarl that wasn't Atlas. It was a machine. The psychological horror of being hunted by her only protector paralyzed Clara for a split second. "Atlas, no, it's me!" she cried, backing away as the dog advanced. Thomas laughed, a sound of pure, detached ego. "He's a SEAL asset, Clara. Orders overrule emotion every time." Atlas lunged. Clara dove behind a heavy oak desk as the dog's jaws snapped inches from her arm. She could hear Caleb's voice in her head. "He's a soldier. Give him a new objective." The rhythm of the scene accelerated into a frantic game of cat and mouse. Clara realized she couldn't fight the dog, and she couldn't fight Thomas. She had to fight the system. She looked at the HVAC terminal. If she could flood the system with her own blood, the localized concentration would neutralize the nanites in the entire building, but the blood loss would kill her in minutes. A mini-climax arrived as Thomas fired a suppressed pistol through the desk, the bullet grazing Clara's shoulder. The pain was a cold spark that cleared her mind. "Thomas! If I die, the antidote dies!" she shouted, trying to buy time. "I only need 10 milliliters of your marrow to replicate the sequence, Clara. You're redundant now," he replied, his footsteps echoing as he circled her position. Just as Atlas prepared for another leap, a flashbang grenade erupted at the lobby entrance. The blinding white light and deafening roar sent Thomas reeling and threw the brainwashed Atlas into a sensory overload. Caleb stumbled into the room, his tactical vest shredded, his face a mask of blood and soot. He didn't say a word. He tackled Thomas, the two men crashing through the glass partition of the pharmacy. "Clara! The vents!" Caleb roared as he wrestled for Thomas's gun. Clara didn't hesitate. She grabbed a surgical scalpel from a tray and sliced a deep line across her palm. She slammed her hand onto the intake grate of the ventilation system, the bioluminescent blood being sucked into the high-powered fans. The glowing mist began to spray into the lobby, turning the green fog into a neutralizing gold. The psychological tension broke as she watched the people on the floor start to draw ragged, clean breaths. It was working, but the blood loss was making the room spin. Another twist occurred when Thomas, pinned beneath Caleb, let out a jagged laugh. "You think you're saving them? The hospital is rigged with thermite. If the nanites fail, the building burns." He reached for a secondary detonator on his wrist. "Atlas Compass!" Clara screamed, using the command Caleb had taught her. The red in the dog's eyes flickered. The command wasn't an attack order. It was a retrieval order. The ancient training, buried beneath Thomas's digital override, fought for control. Atlas turned toward Thomas, but he wasn't looking at him as a master. He saw him as the target. The dog launched himself into the pharmacy, his jaws locking onto Thomas's wrist, just as his finger touched the detonator. A mini-climax followed as the detonator clattered across the floor. Caleb grabbed it, but Thomas kicked him back, reaching for a backup blade hidden in his sleeve. "I built you!" Thomas screamed at the dog, stabbing the blade into Atlas's shoulder. The dog didn't let go. He held on with a tenacity that defied physics, his amber eyes regaining their clarity through the pain. "Clara, get the boy!" Caleb shouted, struggling to stand. "The roof! The police helicopters are landing!" Clara ran toward the stairs, her vision fading. She found the hidden room on the 4th floor. It wasn't a prison. It was a high-tech nursery. Her son was there, sitting in a small chair, staring at a monitor showing the lobby. He looked up, and for the first time, Clara saw her own eyes in his. "Me?" he whispered. The word was a healing balm to a decade of agony. The final profound twist arrived as she grabbed his hand. The door behind her didn't open, it exploded. Thomas stood there, his face a mask of gore. Atlas's teeth marks visible on his throat. He held a syringe filled with the pure, black concentrate. "If I can't have the legacy, no one can," he hissed, lunging for the boy. Clara didn't think. She didn't pray. She threw herself in front of her son, feeling the needle sink into her own chest. The black fluid entered her veins, clashing with the glowing antidote. The internal war was a physical agony that made her scream, but she used the last of her strength to shove Thomas toward the open window. "You lost, Thomas," she whispered. At that moment, Atlas burst into the room, a golden engine of vengeance. He didn't stop. He hit Thomas at full speed, the momentum carrying both of them through the glass and out into the rainy night. Clara dragged herself to the ledge, watching as her husband and the dog who had been his shadow fell toward the parking lot 4 stories below. A mini-climax hit when she saw the explosion of the van below, the fire illuminating the fall. She collapsed onto the floor, her son's small hands reaching for her. "Don't leave me," he sobbed. The adrenaline began to fade, and the darkness started to win, but then she heard it. A faint, familiar scratch at the door. Atlas limped into the room. He was charred, bleeding, and his front leg was clearly broken, but he was alive. He had landed on the van's padded roof, surviving the impossible one last time. He crawled to Clara's side, resting his head on her lap, his tail thumping once, weakly, against the floor. Caleb appeared in the doorway, supported by 2 police officers who had finally realized the truth. He looked at the scene: the mother, the son, and the dog. The tactical team began to swarm the building, but the threat was gone. The black vein had been neutralized by Clara's sacrifice. The psychological rhythm of the story reached its conclusion in the back of an ambulance. Clara was draped in a thermal blanket, her son held tightly in her arms. Atlas was lying on the floor at her feet, his wounds bandaged, his amber eyes finally peaceful. Caleb sat across from her, his hand resting on Atlas's head. "What happens now?" Clara asked, her voice a mere shadow. "Now the world knows," Caleb said, showing her the news feed on his phone. The files had reached the press. The senators were being arrested. The accident was being reinvestigated. The lie was dead. The major twist of the ending wasn't a betrayal, but a gift. Caleb reached into his pocket and handed her a small, worn leather journal. "Your husband, the real Thomas. He wrote this before they replaced him with the double. He knew they were coming for him. He left instructions for me to find you. He loved you until the very last second." Clara opened the journal, seeing the familiar handwriting. The man she had loved truly was a hero, and the monster she had fought was merely a shadow wearing his face. She looked at her son, then at Caleb, and finally at Atlas. They were a family forged in the fires of a war that was never supposed to happen. "We're going home, Atlas," she whispered. The dog let out a soft, contented sigh, his head heavy on her feet. The story didn't end with a funeral, but with a beginning. Clara realized that the silence she had sought in the mountains wasn't about being alone. It was about the peace that comes when there are no more secrets to hide. She had been the antidote, the catalyst, and the survivor. But most importantly, she was a mother who had reclaimed her soul from the abyss. Evil survives in the darkness of secrets, but it perishes the moment a single heart chooses to be brave enough to hold on to the truth.